Some were able to stay open. A lot of the smaller ones, I mean, many were shut down for certain, but the ones that did stay open, half, if not three-fourths of the payroll was covered by the government. But then being the only guest, when I got to that bungalow, there were probably 8 of us out of 30, 40 rooms. And then very quickly it was 5, then 3. And there were other hotels that I went to later on that I stayed at the same situation, like this one beautiful villa that normally would be $600 a night for their basic room. It was $45 at that point.
Welcome to Travel Stories with your hosts, Tom Kim and Trevor Mountcastle. This episode, we delve 5 years into the past. We look at the start of the pandemic, and we have a very, very special guest with us today, Chris, long a friend of both Tom and I, and hopefully now a friend of the podcast. Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome.
So Chris, we wanted to have you on the podcast because you've done a couple of incredible things. Okay, more than a couple, but at least two incredible things that we wanted to kind of talk about and share with our listeners on this episode. Just for our listeners' sake, we're recording this a little bit before the 5-year anniversary of the COVID lockdown. We wanted to do this episode. 5 years has kind of been enough, so we don't think it's too soon. But there are some interesting stories that I think came out of COVID and that lockdown, and Chris has a really interesting one. So to summarize, I guess for you made decisions, and you really made life-changing decisions leading up to that pandemic. Talk us through that.
Well, it was a little bit of lucky foresight. I'd actually been in Australia, and when COVID hit over in China, I started hearing about it, and then a little bit more in the U.S. And when I came back to the U.S., I actually went to San Diego. And if you remember how it hit New York first and then quickly went to the West Coast, but most of the rest of the country had a couple of days, a week and a half before lockdown started. But I had seen what the lockdown had done in California. I was staying at a Hilton and walking around. There was nobody at the hotel. All the food was takeaway. So there wasn't quarantine or anything. But I go back home. And a few days later, I'm supposed to go to Joburg for a site visit. So I'm literally driving to the airport. My boss calls me, and I'm about to get on an airplane to Johannesburg. And he says, "Don't get on the airplane. The university is shutting down." And I was like, "Oh, we're going through this now." And I was like, it's not fun over in California. We're going to be stuck 2, 3, 4 weeks like that. Let's go somewhere. So I picked up, went back, changed out bags, drove down to Chicago, turned in some Alaska miles for JAL first, and eventually made my way to Bangkok. It was supposed to be toward Indonesia, got the visa situation literally while I was flying over the Pacific changed. And when I landed in Tokyo for the connection, the visa requirements had already been updated. So then I had to pivot, and I was like, "Hey, can you get me?" I just looked at the flight board and was like, "Where can I go now?" And I was like, "Can you get me to Bangkok instead of Bali?" And the next thing I know, I'm heading toward Bangkok.
So let's dive into that a little bit here. So you make it to Chicago. We already know that things are starting to shut down. Options are starting to become more and more limited. You know that you've got that Japan Airlines first class. You're at the airport. What's the vibe?
It was rough. I walked out and I have pictures of the Chicago, the international terminal, or it's not the international terminal now, but of the JAL where the drop-off area is, no cars. There was one maintenance truck parked out there, but I literally took several pictures sitting in the middle of this 6-8 lane drop-off area with no cars. Going to the airport. Surprisingly, the flagship lounge was supposed to be closed that day, but they forgot to communicate to the employees. So all the employees show up and they're like, "Oh, you're not supposed to be here." It's like, "Well, we're here." So they stayed open one more day. And this was like I think March 21. I need to go back and look at that exact date.
So that's pretty significantly into it, kind of like the beginnings of all of this.
Yeah.
And
So no quarantines yet.
right.
Quarantines are coming in a day or two, and no travel restrictions so much at that point.
So you really kind of squeaked in, like right as things were locking down. You kind of were right almost at that border or that edge.
You're like rolling under the door as the blast door is closing.
Yeah, and speaking of the door that's closing, too, when I checked in at JAL, they said I couldn't get on because they were reading the quarantine restrictions that had yet to go into effect, which were going into effect in 48 hours. So I can't remember the terminology, but I'd already been Googling everything. And I was like, no, read this. And it took about an hour to get me checked in to be allowed actually into the restrictions into the country you're entering. Japan wasn't an issue at that point. But even at that time, going back to the trivia you asked about the vibe, I mean, the American gate agents and lounge people were having huddles of like 30 people at a time. They didn't know what was going on. Supervisors didn't know what was going on. There were people crying because they knew their jobs were ending, or at least
at
somehow
stake,
being
they were impacted, right?
Yeah. And it was a very somber moment.
Can I ask the question that I'm sure some people are thinking, like, this didn't bother you? Like, you made the decision. I'm going. I'm not wasting this opportunity. I got the ticket. I'm going to Asia. Like, did you have any concerns at this time? Like, were you like thinking about like, oh, am I doing the right thing here? Like, what was going through your head, out of curiosity?
I wasn't certain. The only thing that I didn't really think through, because we all thought it was going to be a month, a couple of weeks, a month. I mean, there wasn't, and I was just like, and I'd already actually planned to take vacation after my Joburg trip. So it was in that, and the question was, after seeing what happened in California to where it wasn't fun, I was like, okay, do I want to stay in my house where I'm living, or do I want to go to a beach?
It was a calculated decision, and you were absolutely kind of weighing the information available at the time. And this is great because sometimes I forget about, because I didn't have any active travel in March, but I do remember some of what was going on around that time, and it's a good reminder that when we go back in the time machine back to March of, what was that, 2020. Many people were like, oh, this is going to be like, oh, yeah, there might be a short quarantine. That we didn't know at the time what was about to happen, right? Like, this was still early on, and people had very different thoughts about what the world was going to look like for the next 30, 90 days than what we ultimately understood it to be later that year, right?
Yeah, there was no information at that point. Things were changing so quickly. Nobody knew what.
But there were indications. I mean, we did see what China was doing in Wuhan. We knew the severity of it. I mean, I think at one point they had clearly had lockdowns in Wuhan and other places in Asia. I mean, I think we clearly had indications of the severity, just not how long this was going to be. Walk us through that experience. You're landing in Japan. Now, you said that you had changed your flight en route or when you had landed.
Yeah, when I got to Tokyo, I wasn't allowed into Bali. So could not go to Indonesia because they had changed their travel restrictions, entry restrictions at that point in time. So then I had to pivot and say, okay, where could I go? Wound up being allowed into Thailand. And Tom, you had asked about, the door. There was a physical door. So I had the option to actually transfer to, like I said, I turned in JAL miles for F. Wound up flying a business class connection because of the plane, but there was an option to leave 6 hours later out of Haneda. I flew into Narita, and then the Haneda plane had first. And they were like, oh, do you want to take that? And I was like, I think I just want to get someplace. I think that's more important now. So it took a fairly quick connection, didn't transfer. But when I landed in Thailand, in Bangkok, it was about 11:20 p.m. Big, huge line, paperwork to fill out. Nobody knew, like all this paperwork was coming off the printers, like they were making this up as they go. I filled out everything as quick as I could. There was a huge line at immigration. And I'm like, I need to get out of here. I'm going to get locked. I just had this feeling. And I was like, I need to get someplace as soon as, and I knew that there had, like in Bangkok, that there was like a fast track for business class. So, and I was like, there has to be someplace shorter. So one of my pieces of advice is if you see a long line, go look for a shorter one somewhere. Found it, went through at about 11:56 p.m. Saw all of the luggage from our baggage carousel on one of those carts that are tied together like a train being hauled off. I went, ran after it, grabbed my luggage, and when I did, I heard slam, 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 slam. They shut all the gates for immigration at midnight, at exactly midnight. And that's when, I don't know for certain, but the assumption is those people got stuck somewhere, possibly a quarantine. I don't know, because the quarantines went into effect the next day or two. So that literal doors shut at midnight behind me.
You were minutes from disaster, is what I hear.
Yep. I mean, Bangkok was still, you couldn't eat in the restaurants. It had to be takeaway. There was no quarantine yet. That was coming very shortly or very soon. And even within Thailand, over the next year or two, Thailand did great that they didn't have people like COVID. They literally did not let people in. It was very difficult to get in. They controlled it very well for about a year and a half. And then when people went to go see their families for the Thai New Year, the second year, that's when COVID really hit. But the first year, they handled it, case count wise, much better than the rest of it.
So here you are, you land in Japan. You're literally taking the last flight out of Japan. You barely, narrowly, by 4 minutes, make it into the country of Thailand. At this point, do you even know where you're going from there? I mean, you're probably the other side of immigration and customs. And are you figuring out, okay, am I going to go to the Grand Hyatt? Am I going to go to the Regency? Where'd you go from there?
There's a few days in Bangkok, and then Bangkok was sort of shut down. I did check out, I think it was the Moxie there for a day or two. And then I was just like, okay, surely there's, better if I'm going to get stuck here also. It's like, let's go find a beach. So I went to Phuket. As soon as I got to Phuket, I was like, okay, never been to Phuket before. I'd only been to Bangkok. And Phuket's got, large beach areas throughout. That's a huge island. And the next morning I wake up, go to walk on the beach, and I get chased off by a Thai police officer. You can't walk on the beach.
Oh, wow. As a COVID restriction, you mean, or something
It's not open air enough.
It's a COVID restriction. Yeah. So then I was like, okay, that's kind of odd. So then 2 days later, I get a knock on the door, and one of the assistant managers tells me they're shutting down. So they
the hotel.
The hotel's moving.
Oh my! Wow.
Yep.
Which hotel was this?
The La Meridian.
Oh, the La Meridian. Okay, in
Phuket.
The Khao Lak one or the Phuket one?
Not Khao Lak. No.
Okay.
I think that's technically the Phuket one. I could be wrong.
Got it.
If you were on the island, then it was Phuket. Yeah, because Khao Lak is off the island, just north.
That one's much further north. But yeah, so that got shut down. I went to a Hilton DoubleTree. That got shut down. Then I made it to a much smaller, like backpack. There was nothing else open. There was no tourist at that point in time. The walking street in Phuket, the big where the nightlife is, you couldn't even walk through it. It was blocked off. It was barricaded off. All the go-go bars, everything was closed on that area.
Were you at this point at all, like, was there any bells going off in your head? I'm like, all the major resorts are shutting down. There's nobody in the tourist street. I'm now stuck in Thailand. What was going through your head? I'm just kind of curious.
I was trying to find a place to stay.
It was just more utilitarian. Like, you were just like, I am in problem-solving mode. I must find a place to sleep tonight.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
So then at that point, I found a backpack place, stayed there for like 2 days, very small, basic room. And then they knock on the door and say, hey, we need you to pay for 30 days. And I'm like, I'm not staying 30 days here.
Right.
And they're like, well, what are you going to do? And I'm like, well, I'm going to go someplace else. And they're like, well, you got to stay 30 days there too. And I'm like, what are you talking? So what had happened was they shut down all travel in the country. So if you were at a hotel, you could not move between hotels.
Oh, okay.
It had not been enacted yet. We had a few days. So I went back to the airport and I was like, okay, do I go back to Bangkok? And I just look on the board. I'm like, nothing's happening in Phuket. You can't go to the beach. You can't walk around that much. It's like, surely somewhere. So I go to the airport, look on the board, and I always pronounce Koh Samui wrong. Like, I think I said like Samui,
Oh.
Samui.
I was going to
I
say
always
Koh Samui sounded right to me.
Yeah, absolutely does. Whatever I was saying before that was
Oh,
wrong.
okay.
I look at it. So I bought two different plane tickets. I bought
It's
one
like a
that night.
Cajun pronunciation for Koh Samui.
Yeah,
Huh?
yeah. I don't know what it was, but it was absolutely wrong. So, but I had two tickets. I had a ticket back to Bangkok, and I had a ticket to this other place. And then I found out Samui's an island, so I get on the airplane and land there. And then there's another smaller island, Koh Phangan, which has like the big full moon party, dance party. And I'm like, surely that's nice. So I get there to that island and they're like, oh, where are you quarantining? And I'm like, oh my gosh. So they're like, you can either quarantine or go back. And I was like, well, the place, and I had just taken a ferry. Sorry, I landed in Samui, then was taking a ferry to this other smaller island. And they're like, go stand over there. They made me stand away from everybody. And when the wind direction changed, they made me go stand on another part of this big
Oh, you're
parking lot.
downwind now, so okay, we can work with you.
Like I didn't understand. The guy was like shaking his hands at me. He's like, go move. Like I was like, okay. But the reason I went back was at the ferry where I took it. I saw people sitting on the beach, and I was like, that's
where I need to be. If I'm going to quarantine or if I'm going to survive this COVID situation, I'm going to do it, mind you, with sand and sun and waves and surf. So it sounds infinitely better than maybe where we were at this point in the pandemic potentially.
Yeah. So that's where I landed for actually 3 months in this small bungalow, like just a bungalow. Like there was like 30 of those bungalow rooms, beautiful beach, one of the best in Samui, but I was paying $18 a day. Very basic. So let's just be very clear about that. But spent 3 months there. Yeah.
Well, I mean, go ahead.
So you escape the go-go bars with tumbleweeds floating past them or bouncing past them to finally make it to a beach. So 3 months, did 3 months turn into 6 months? Did 3 months turn into longer?
Yeah. So stayed at that place 3 months. And then little by little, I wouldn't say things opened up, but Samui, everybody wore masks, 100%. There was nobody who didn't wear a mask. That's just the Thai culture. But little by little, all the tourists who were sort of stuck there, not people like me who just showed up, but there's a lot of Russian, a lot of French people, tourists who were long-term tourists started going home back to their country. And little by little, the tourism industry ended. And I do want to clarify, even though I'm sitting on the beach, I was very acutely aware that I'll give a story of my motorbike that I was renting after about 2 months from the same couple. They owned about 30 motorbikes. She called me and said, hey, can you bring the motorbike in? I was like, oh, okay. I thought she meant she just wanted the week's payment at that point in time. But no, she needed the motorbike because they had to close down their shop because they hadn't rented a motorbike in 2 months to anybody for me. And if you know Samui, after all the tourism shut down, so similar to the Phuket walking street, there's a large beach for Samui that's very popular, lots of clubs, tours, things like that. After there's nobody watching those stores, over time, it just became dilapidated. People lost their livelihood. Thailand's just a huge tourism. And when that just completely shut, there's other countries that are like that, but Thai is almost all tourism. So little by little, especially on Samui, just the buildings that were there were dilapidated because the owners, even if they rented, the rent was gone completely. They just bailed. Then even the owners just gave up on the buildings. And little by little, you could tell and watch. It affected the larger places first, then the other smaller places after that.
So we went from an escape movie to a post-apocalyptic movie is what I have in my head. So I'm thinking about the movies that I'm watching. The Chris movies, and there was the race through the airport, and you're going through the door, grabbing your hat from the door that's about to slam down. A la Indiana Jones. Now we're in like kind of like Walking Dead or something where you have this street with all these storefronts and everything that's dilapidated and not kept up because there's no customers, right? The owners have left, they've abandoned their spaces. That's just really interesting. You would think that I mean, it makes sense, but it just doesn't. I wouldn't have thought about it that when you have a 100% tourist industry economy, right, like a Koh Samui where there really isn't any other things, I would imagine there, that you're right. It gets complete desolation if there are no visitors.
So I have to ask, you're there for quite some time. The other tourists have all left. Do you find that you're seeing some locals regularly that are they starting to accept you as part of their community, part of their surviving together, we're all in this together sort of a thing?
Yeah, and one thing that the country did very well was the government subsidies did pay out for hotels to keep their employees. I mean, lots of them went back home to wherever their family was. Some were able to stay open. A lot of the smaller ones, I mean, many were shut down for certain, but the ones that did stay open, half, if not 3/4 of the payroll was covered by the government. But then being the only guest, when I got to that bungalow, there were probably 8 of us out of 30, 40 rooms. And then very quickly it was 5, then 3. And there were other hotels that I went to later on that I stayed at the same situation, like this one beautiful villa that normally would be $600 a night for their basic room. It was $45 at that point. And because they were just looking to get anything from anybody you possibly, once Bangkok could open up to Samui, they had a few more expats come onto the island. But then the island itself, so there was a quarantine for all of the country. There was a separate quarantine for Samui. So if you wanted to get to Samui, you had to go through for a little while, you had to go through 2 quarantines. So even if you lived in Bangkok, you couldn't come to Samui without a quarantine for a little while. But little by little, there was the core people. But then I ate breakfast with the same people who worked there. So a lot of them I call my friends, but they eventually moved on because their family was going through trouble. They had to go take care of their parents who got COVID. So then they had to leave their jobs there. So even if they could have stayed, they needed to go take care of their mom or dad who lived in a different province. So little by little, people left for different reasons.
So, Chris, can you give us a timestamp of this? Like, so when they started implementing that second quarantine, when was that? Was that what part of was that in 2020? Was that a little bit later, or?
It actually happened twice, if I recall. The quarantine itself for Samui happened because there was the provincial travel stopped for a good while. So several months, so middle summer of 2020. Then what happened was when the Thai New Year's came up, that wasn't allowed. Travel wasn't allowed again. But then the second Thai New Year that came around, they actually have a king said, okay, everybody can go see their family now because a lot of them had not been.
They opened up the domestic travel at that point.
Yeah.
And what is that? Is that 21? Is it essentially, or?
Yeah, that would have been about a year and a half, I think, into there. And then at that point, that's when COVID really hit the country. So it's like it happened everywhere else, but they had covered it so well to begin with. Once that travel opened up, it was too late. Then they went through their normal, what everybody else in the world had gone through.
Because, Thailand is so connected. Right, because I mean, when you're talking about the French and the Russians, and the diaspora of people that come to Koh Samui or to Phuket or Bangkok, it's so many. So it's kind of amazing that they didn't have a bigger outbreak at the beginning. But it sounds like really they did almost everything right, and then once they did open up, even domestically, without any foreign visitors, that was enough to kind of start things going.
Yeah, because Bangkok, was the epicenter for Thailand. Koh Samui and even north, the northern part of the country or outside in the cities, they were all pretty good. But then once Bangkok got allowed to go out, that's when things kind of, got a hand for the rest of the country. And then another shutdown happened. So at that point, that's when the other quarantine of you can't come to. And Samui was very lucky that, they handled that very well. It's an island separate from everybody, and it's kind of difficult to get to. There's one or two ferries, and then there's Bangkok Airlines, which is a private airline. So it's not that well traveled to outside of the locals. Like Bangkok people wouldn't come to Samui very often. So that's one detriment there. But, once they shut it off to where it was more difficult, then Samui actually held up very well. There were very few cases of COVID on the island of Koh Samui for like the first year and a half. We're talking maybe 100.
So I've got two questions for you. The first question, and then I'll pause. There's another notable person that enjoyed, quote mark, lived out the pandemic on Koh Samui. Did you end up getting the chance to meet Justin Ross Lee?
Yes, I did. I think he showed up to the Hyatt Regency Samui a couple of days. So funny story about that. Yeah. So he had been living in Thailand well before COVID. So I can't remember for how long. I mean, he speaks some decent Thai, but the Hyatt Regency Koh Samui opened in the middle of the pandemic.
Great timing.
I tell you why, because I drove by it. I was like, they don't have this place ready. It's not going to open. I'd lived there for 5 months when it opened. I was the very first customer there. But the reason it did open during the pandemic is that the Buddhist monks determine when you get married, when, different things, business cycles, things like that. So the monks had actually determined what day it should open. And when the monks say, hey, you need to open in 4 months, you open no matter what. So they did. It was a gorgeous ceremony, full day worth of, it started like 8 a.m, ceremony and all this things I did not know about. And another thing sort of travel related. So Hyatt, when they open a new hotel, they have to have an inspection to say, okay, is this hotel up to standard? But Hyatt corporate couldn't send anyone to the hotel. So there was nobody available to go to visit outside of Hyatt corporate. So because they would have to quarantine for 14 days. So what they did is they had the GM from the Park Hyatt Bangkok, who had recently opened that hotel. He's Australian. He was obviously living in Bangkok, so he could come down freely. So he came down and stayed for like the week before and then the next 2 weeks just to kind of give advice and everything. So that's how I met the GM of the Park Hyatt Bangkok. So we hung out, but at the Hyatt Regency Samui, there were days to where I was the only guest there. So it's about 200 rooms, gorgeous hotel, obviously brand new. But on the weekends, there'd be a few expats, people who lived in Samui, who just wanted their kids to come out and play in the pool. They would just get a room. But hanging out with the GM of the Park Hyatt Bangkok, but then he went home and then there were times there was just nobody at the hotel, and it was fully staffed. There was 70, 80 people working at the hotel. Yeah, that was kind of weird in terms of like being at a resort like that all to yourself. And I have to like process having that experience. Everybody wants to fly first class and be the only person in the cabin, right? That's
right.
That's
I've had that
being the
times.
only person. Yeah. And it's great. It's phenomenal. Just walking around, you can just walk around and do whatever you want to in first class. You're the only person. But being at a resort and walking around and there's literally nothing going on. People are attending to their own job responsibilities, but there's nobody to talk to. There's no interaction. You can go to the beach, but then what do you do after that? Then you go sit at the pool. After a while, it's just kind of surreal. But then in the background, I knew that people were losing their jobs. Their livelihood was changing. People were dying. And it was like, I'm just very fortunate to have that experience. But I did want to share. I kept taking pictures, just, people showing, here's what's really happening in these countries that are losing their tourism.
Surreal is the exact word I had in my mind as you're talking about this. It becomes kind of a gilded cage, right, in a way, because it is beautiful. It sounds lovely, but at the same time, you're right. But, at the same time, I think many of us were probably feeling similar ways in the depths of of the pandemic, whether in 2021, where, we had to make excuses and do this kinds of like, virtual social interacting, right? Because, it wasn't happening in real life anyway. So I guess in some ways I don't understand. And in other ways, I'm like, I can completely relate, because if I put myself back into kind of the depths of the pandemic, I can remember bits and pieces of it.
And talking about the gilded cage, when the spike hit in Bangkok after about a year and a half, so I stayed at the Grand Hyatt for a total of 6 months in Bangkok. It was like two months, went back to Samui, because for the longest time, I couldn't leave Samui, because if I left, I couldn't come back. So I stayed there. But then finally when it was like, okay, I didn't want something to happen and not be able to come back. So I was very hesitant to actually leave to go to Bangkok or go to Phuket or something.
I could see that.
But one time when I went to the Grand Hyatt Bangkok, I think both of y'all have been there, right?
Of course.
Oh, yes.
At that big, huge shopping mall, that big, huge intersection.
Yeah. With the shrine and everything, the Erewhon shrine, right? Yep.
Oh, yeah. And Central
that
World.
That intersection right there, I've walked out and stood in the middle of the road and took a 360-degree picture.
With like nobody around?
Because there was nobody driving at early that night. That's how little traffic there was.
I can't even imagine. Like it just blows my mind that you could be in that part of Bangkok and just have it be just
for minutes.
For minutes.
Wow. Not just the red light. I stood there and there was nobody. So that's how that was. And then talking about the gilded cage, then there was more shutdowns. The lounge closed, so you were, by 9 p.m. you had to stay in your room. You couldn't go to the lounge. So then they shut the lounge down, and then you could just order room service the whole time. And then that was another alarm. Everybody wants room service, right? And I was like, things are getting worse. Let's go back to Samui. But there were times to where, the hotel had the Grand Hyatt had like 30 people. And then
wow.
Getting the lounge room, I could order a bottle of champagne. They're like, oh, do you want the whole bottle? It's like, okay, well, I don't have anything else to do. And then at that point, I was like, okay, when you shut the lounge down and there's a curfew at 9 p.m., we could get stuck here again. I was like, I'm going back to Samui. So then I went back to Samui.
I mean, those spa cottages are nice, but I don't think I'd want to be stuck there.
And you couldn't go out to the pool. You couldn't go out to the pool either. So,
oh, well, that's no fun at all. So I want to kind of drive us a little bit, further here. So you've been through 2 shutdowns at this point in Thailand. You stuck around for the opening, I assume. Talk us through that. And where were you? I think, if I recall from your notes, you spent some time on Koh Samui, but you also made it back to Bangkok. I don't know if you made it down to Phuket for that opening, during that opening period. But talk through, your experiences. Talk through the emotions that you sort of observed, because I mean, at this point, you are among the Thai people. You're a member of the Thai people. You might not look like a Thai, but I mean, you've spent enough time with them to understand some of the emotions that they went through during the 18 to 24 month period. Just walk us through that reopening experience.
And Nit Noi Thai, that means little bit, like little spicy. And one thing, and everybody asks me, is like, how good is your Thai? And I'm like, I never learned Thai because I always thought I was going home soon. So I learned a little bit, but like we said earlier, nobody expected it to be this long. And I was like, well, if I learn it, I'm leaving soon, or, there was always something else. But one thing, thinking about the sort of reopening, was I did 2, and this goes back to travel and airplanes. I actually went to Phuket when the first international flight landed. It was a Qatar flight, that first international flight back into Thailand. There's huge media coverage. So I was like, okay, I want to go down and see that. So we were able to fly from Samui to Phuket. And that was really emotional, being able to see everybody happy. It was like our life is starting to come back with these few people. The plane was not packed by, maybe 75 people. The plane was not packed, but as soon as those first people came in, and they had to quarantine, but they knew those people after quarantine were going to be tourists. It was like, okay, our lifeblood is coming back there. That was really emotional. Another one, even though it's not Thai related, I just happened upon the first, make sure I get this straight, the first flight from London to the US in JFK. That one was also really emotional because there were families lined up that the travel restrictions, I can't remember the details. Like I don't think you could leave the UK. There was something that was extra special about the UK or something to where, but there were people who had been separated from their families, or like they couldn't come over from the UK. I can't remember. It was some weird difference between, I think they weren't allowed out of the UK or something like that. I can't remember. But when that first BA flight landed, there was all sorts of people, signs, just happy to see families who had been separated for years at this point. That was something that wasn't shared, in the media as much, but seeing that and kind of understanding, okay, you've been separate, or, somebody was supposed to get married 2 weeks as soon as the quarantine, shutdown started, and they had to postpone their wedding 2 years. Stuff like that, really seeing the travel, sort of the industry side about how that happened, that was really unique and special. And not just meeting people, but being able to see their emotion, what they were feeling through that, and just being able to experience that. That was something that really meant a lot over the time.
And I remember that. I remember that first flight because if I recall correctly, they had Virgin and British Airways take off at the exact
At the same time. Yeah, you're right.
out of
You're
London
right.
Heathrow.
Yes.
They made a big deal about that flight. I suppose those two flights. That was an emotional thing, at least to watch from afar. And you had the opportunity to witness that in person.
I don't really remember how I got there, but I made us. But when I found out it was that day, and I happened to be in JFK, I mean, this would have happened 2.5 years later. I just remember London being something. It took a lot longer, or something like that. But I made a point to go over to that terminal. And then I saw where exit of immigration is, where everything was set up. Yeah, that was really.
So when did you actually finally escape Thailand? Like, can we go to that part of the movie now? Where
It was right over 2 years. I think is how long it was. Yeah,
that's incredible.
About 2 years.
How do you even deal with that from a visa standpoint? Like, how do you even stay in the country that long?
Oh, they kept extending it. Now, you did have to go in and do the paperwork, et cetera, but then they did a visa. It was free extensions every 60 days.
Wow. Well, I mean, it totally makes sense. I mean, they kind of don't give you too many options. So,
and they need you. They would need people.
Yeah.
So before we leave Thailand, before we leave the sort of escape, or I suppose escape from the COVID lockdowns, we've talked to folks that have done long-term travel, but I don't think we've talked to anybody that has done as long-term travel as you have. You're in Thailand for 2 years. I'll just say I have prescriptions I need. Not to share your medical stuff, but like you literally left with what, a suitcase and a backpack, and you're living out of that suitcase and backpack for 2 years. How do you make do? What sort of things did you need to do to try to just ensure that you had everything you needed to be able to, continue to live comfortably and, take care of all of your needs?
Well, I've been fortunate to only had one medical issue during the 2 years over there. And the medical situation in Thailand is actually quite nice. I didn't have to experience it. It wasn't that bad. But from what I hear, plenty of people take the medical tourism to Thailand. So there's sort of time on it. And there's English hospitals and local hospitals. So there's, ways that they keep that, much easier for people like me to be able to navigate. When I left, like I said, a month, I took a carry-on, with the, parallel pants, a couple pairs of shorts, some sandals. That was it. But then little by little, it just, Samui, one thing about Thailand and Samui especially, it's just like, sometimes it just takes a long time to do something. Like if I needed to get a photo.
Island time.
Yeah. I mean, it just, and stuff like, and even just for, now that I'm doing something different, being on the road, just sometimes it takes a lot of time to do something that would be normal. It's just not necessarily just getting groceries, but all of a sudden you need this one thing. and it takes you an hour and a half to go find it. Or if I need something certified, or I didn't bring my passport to the post office. I was like, oh, but it took 45 minutes to get to the post office. So now just little things just add up to sort of that lifestyle that's a little different in terms of.
By the way,
But,
to take us
you
on
know,
to take us on a small tangent, just on the backs of our everyday carry episode, what team are you from a luggage perspective?
it's purely a carry-on,
So
and a bag.
are you team Briggs and Riley?
Oh yeah, I actually just like literally today. So if we wind up talking about the SAS trip, I've actually had my luggage lost for the last month. So I had to buy, and I purchased because my Briggs and Riley got ripped during that. So I sent it in, and they're like, "Yeah, we can't replace it." So I just ordered a brand new, the 21 International, the gray one, the silverish gray one.
Oh, I don't think I've seen the
It
grade one.
literally just came in an hour ago.
Wait.
Wow.
They said that they couldn't replace it. Could they repair it?
I'm sorry, they couldn't repair it. They had to replace it. So I just got the
So
replacement.
you got a brand new that huh? That doesn't suck.
That sounds like a warranty that I want to get behind.
And just for clarification on their side, if they can't, you can either get a sample of exactly what you have for free, or you can get a $350 credit and then buy whatever else you want. So I just traded colors. I thought the silver, I think it's called gray or silver, whatever that new and limited edition is. I just wanted to be a little bit different. So, but yeah, I'm Team Briggs and Riley, carry on, and just a backpack. It's just easier.
Another testimonial for teams Briggs and Riley, which Trevor and I were on, and I did notice, when we saw each other not too long ago, I was like, I think Chris is a member of the club.
Yeah, by far.
Okay, well, any final thoughts as we transition from COVID discussion, because you've got another really interesting topic that we definitely want to cover. Any final thoughts on the pandemic spent in Thailand?
No, just the people of Thailand. I never lived. I've always traveled, but never really stayed anywhere that long. By no means by that long. 2 weeks in all of my other travels would be fairly extensive. But kind of opened my eyes in terms of what living over there. Now, I didn't live there per se. I lived in hotels, so that's a different lifestyle if you're living in hotels. So it's not like going expat or retirement. That's a little bit different. So, but had lovely time. I mean, I love going back to the prices are going like I paid $35 for the Grand Hyatt Bangkok for those 5 months, 6 months. I was paying.
I think those days are gone, unfortunately.
Yeah, those days are gone. Even Samui is now, if you get under 200, you're doing really good. And I think it was 70, 75. Samui's beautiful place. Thai people were only had one incident that I'd speak negative of, but a lovely country. I try to get back, every probably 6 months now. But just
considering how long you were there and under the stressful conditions, that sounds like a win. It sounds like you lucked out in a way. I mean, it some cases it sounds like it was a bit of a gilded cage, but at least it was a gilded cage with a lot of benefits and nice people and a culture that I think was accommodating.
Yeah, I think, with so many things going on that were negative, I like to try to think that I helped out in that situation. I wouldn't call it a win-win because, what else is going on in the world? But I like to think that, somebody was there to kind of help out. And I did my best to go. Like when I went back for the 1-year anniversary of the Hyatt Regency opening, I tipped the entire staff that was there for the whole year. I did a party for them. There was a party. And then I tipped out, financially tried to support them for that. So, because it meant so much to see them again a year later.
That's just
cool.
Sorry,
a year after I'd already left.
Wow. Despite having that time and a little bit of a challenging circumstances for why you were there, it seems like you've got a warm place in your heart for Thailand.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay. First of all, thank you for sharing that. I think our listeners will really, really appreciate just probably a completely different perspective than what many of us had.
A unique perspective.
Absolutely. I followed, your messages when you were sort of sharing them. We were kind of living vicariously through you. Another thing that I think some of us were living vicariously through you on is a more recent event. So I think, and I'm sure Tom's going to correct me here, but sometime over the summer, SAS departed Star Alliance, right? I think they were Star Alliance, and they're now part of SkyTeam. And they did this really cool promotion where if you flew, I think it was 15 airlines, you would earn 1 million SAS air
All the
miles.
SkyTeam partners, right? Is essentially what you would have to do.
All of the sort of active, yeah. There's actually
Right.
19 SkyTeam partners, but because of limitations of 4 others, it was 50.
4 others, aka I think is it S9, S7, which is a Russian
No,
airline.
Well, I think those are in One World, right?
Is
Which one of them is?
S7? Oh, okay. It's Aeroflot. That
So, point of clarification. So, Aeroflot was, I can't remember the terminology. They were sort of not in SkyTeam anymore.
Oh,
But they
really?
were like ITA Airlines, the Italian, they were moving, so that didn't qualify. Then Middle Eastern Airlines, MEA, it was Beirut, so that wasn't one of the 19. And then there were only 17 where you could actually earn. I hope I'm doing this right. 17 that you could earn, but you had to fly 15. So you had that sort of buffer of 2. But
They give you a little bit of grace, a little bit.
little bit of room to work.
ITA, you would not earn credit. And then even if you flew MEA, it wasn't one of the 15 or something like that. So I actually wound up flying. I intently, purposefully flew all 19 just
Oh,
to
wow.
say it.
Just to be able to
Just
say
to
it.
Overachiever. You wanted to be an overachiever.
It's a completist, or what is it? Yeah.
So walk us through this. The experience or the promotion was what, a few months?
Just barely 2 months, I think. Yeah, they announced it fairly quick. Like everybody was like, "Hey, can we spread it out a little more? Because that's a lot of flying in the long run."
It really is.
They announced it, and I think it started maybe 2 weeks later. It was something, and I was like, "Oh, I'm doing this." So we're going to make this happen.
It's so funny to see, like the gauntlet has been laid down. And how many people picked up that gauntlet? I mean, it's just a testament to the crazy nuts people that we have in the community. I mean, because I'm like thinking, who's going to do this? And then you see the number of people, and the uptake is incredible. Like it was so many more people than I thought. To be completely honest.
I don't know if they'll ever say how many actually did it. One way that I was putting it into perspective of what that number would be was on the Kenyan Air Fifth Freedom from Bangkok to Canton, China. Those boarding gates where you actually sort of clear security again to get to the gate. So then everybody's just sitting.
The security, like waiting area that they kind of put you in.
Waiting. Yeah, that's a waiting area there. So the Kenyan Air flight only had maybe 40, 50 people total, but it had come in from Nairobi, stopped in Bangkok, and then went on to Canton and then went back. I was just looking around and I was like, who looks like they'd be doing something like this? So I intentionally walked by these 2 guys. One was eventually I'll jump back in the lounge in Bangkok. It's the Air France lounge that we were using. I saw a guy on his SAS app. I was like, that's kind of odd. And I'm like, if you're using
some clues,
this is not. So then when I saw the same dude in the waiting area, he was talking to somebody else. So I kind of walked over really slowly and listening to the conversation. Didn't want to interrupt him, but then I heard him say something like SES this.
I love this part of this podcast, by the way, because I cannot tell you, there almost needs to be a phrase for this where, you are on a mileage run and you see the same person in the airport lounge that was there with you earlier. And then you see them on the next leg and you're like, okay, I know what you're doing. You are on the same, and then you automatically feel like, okay, I can come up to this guy because he clearly is a points and miles person. Because who's doing this crazy stuff where you're basically going right back on back-to-back flights or whatever? There's got to be some sort of we got to come up with a miles and points term for this, because this has happened so many times, right? Where you're on the plane, you notice this person, like, oh wait, I saw that guy on that flight. And then, I'm seeing him again, and it's
not just the connection. It's like you're going back to where you just left.
Exactly.
We're all
when you double
together.
It's like the double back or something like that is what you need to call it. Because that is something that I would like to say has happened to me a fair number of times. And I feel like that's exactly what you're talking about right there.
So the 3 of us started talking and we just kind of got loud and everything like that. And then this Indian couple walks up to us. They were like, oh, are you doing Million Miler also? So it turned out there were 5 of us right there. There could have been more. I mean, I don't know.
I think
But
loud
just on
talking,
that
by the
one
way,
flight,
is another characteristic of this particular scenario, because that has always been my problem. Is like I'll run into them, and then we start talking loud, and then people are like, "Would you guys shut up?" I mean, you're so damn.
Well, you get excited.
I know
Get
you do.
excited about
When you
this
meet
stuff.
another
You get,
one of your
wow.
species in the wild, it's great. Anyway, sorry about that. I just needed to put a little tangent in there because it just really was very meaningful for me just then.
and talking about timing, this was early on. So I started maybe a week after. So I flew
Oh, early
Seattle,
adopter.
Taipei. Yeah, I started pretty early on. And then, but I spent I did some vacation in the middle. Like I was in Hainan for like a week, but this was my segment number 6 at that point in time. And this is probably 2 or 3 weeks into the promotion, maybe 4.
Wait,
Um,
I gotta interrupt you for a second. You said
yeah.
you spent a week in Hainan, China?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll get back to this promotion in a second, but so you're probably one of the first people that I've talked to since the pandemic that has actually spent meaningful amount of time in China. How was the experience? And like, what would you go back?
Well, I was going to spend more time because I'd planned on getting my 10-year visa before taking this trip because it would have made things a lot easier because of all the transit issues. Hainan is one of the places to where you can, I want to say they're 30 days, kind of like.
This is the transit without visa program, essentially. Like there's certain cities, right, that you have extended non-visa access? Or?
Yeah, Macau. And then I don't know what Hong Kong, that one always gets a little sticky.
Because those are all special administrative regions, but then I think there's certain gateway cities as well within
like
mainland China itself.
Or
so it gets a little confused. So the gateway, and if you do the transit without visa, you have to. The thing about Hong Kong is if you enter Hainan, and I know this from experience because I got chased down by immigration. So I came in from Hong Kong and was trying to go to, I can't remember where, but they didn't allow me on the plane. Like I'd already cleared immigration, left the air, in the airport. I'm about to board the flight. They came and got me and said, "Where did you come from?" I was like, "I flew in from Hong Kong." It's like, you got to go back to Hong Kong then. You can't. I was trying to go to Xiamen. That's what I was trying to do.
Okay.
To pick up another segment because
that's one of the other SkyTeam members, right? Xiamen Airlines.
And they're like, "No, you can't do that." I'm like, "I'm just transiting." So it's once I realized all the transit information for China is one or the other, not combinable, it started making a lot more sense. But to Trevor, to your question, I actually plan to spend in the next month or two some significant time in China. In Hainan, it was more. I don't know what it was like before COVID, but I didn't ever cross my mind. There was never any COVID, any concerns or anything about that. It was just, kind of normal.
That's just like a tropical island, right? In China is Hainan?
Yeah, it's actually very close to. So the general manager of the Hyatt Regency Samui is now the general manager of the Hyatt Regency Da Nang, Vietnam. And literally, if you have a pair of binoculars, you can look from Hainan to Da Nang.
Wow, it's that close. Oh, I didn't realize.
It's that close. There's no flights and there's no ferries. I don't know why, but
is that Haiphong Bay or is that further north of Haiphong Bay? Because I thought Haiphong Bay was pretty close to China too. So that's interesting though. I didn't ask that from a COVID perspective. I asked that more just because they were very, very slow to open, and capacity still is incredibly slow. And so I was just curious, sort of the experience, considering there's just not as many.
Is it the capacity or is it the demand? Because, I feel like the Chinese carriers are still flying, right? Especially their dedicated routes internationally. But I feel like there just isn't the same business demand and the same, kind of leisure demand that there was back pre-pandemic.
Right. But that contributes to the question so here you are, an American visiting China, and in years past, you'd be one of many. And now you're one of a few potentially in proportion.
Well, intra-China travel is off the charts. Planes.
I believe that. Yeah.
The capacity, or I don't know about the capacity, but There's flights everywhere all the time, morning, noon, night, red eye, everything. That's so if it's a question of, hey, what about international travel to the rest of Asia? I know the capacity to the U.S. is very limited. I want to say, and that's more of a government restrictions, who's going to open up and do more flights or Chinese. I'm not so sure about that. But the intra-China and then also intra-Asia, it's booming. It's booming. I don't, if it's personal or business, I'm not sure, but it's tight. Planes are packed.
Well, that's an interesting perspective. So, definitely appreciate that. I know the U.S. has a parity thing where if Air China gets a flight, then United or one of the U.S. flights, et cetera. But I mean, the U.S. airlines also have the challenge of they only have so many wide bodies, so they might not want to allocate. I mean, for example, I think we've got more capacity going to Australia than we usually do. We've got United finding other interesting. I think United takes a dartboard out, but that's a topic for another podcast.
And I think a lot of the Western carriers are at a disadvantage because they're not going through Russian airspace, right? And
that as well. Yeah, so
where a lot of the Chinese native carriers are doing that, so they're almost at a advantage, providing the international gateway services that they're assigned to by the government. Because I think it's basically each international pair. It's only one Chinese carrier that gets it, so they don't compete with each other.
Yeah, it's easy to forget the impact of that Russian airspace overfly when you're going to China and to the Pacific.
Talking about the Russian airspace, so leaving from, and this wasn't the million-mile thing, I left from, I want to say Taipei to Vienna on a nonstop flight. It flew because of a wind. I was talking to Brander about this or something, but look, I had a picture of the route. You could see it on the seat back. It went from Taipei to Singapore around the bottom of India.
Wow.
And then up toward Europe. I was sitting in coach.
Oh, no.
The flight was like 3.5 hours longer than what it was blocked. Like when I woke up and I saw we're only in India, and I was like, we are nowhere near where we're supposed to be going. But
is China Airlines another SkyTeam carrier or?
Yeah, that would have been China Airlines. Yeah.
So you think that's because of the relationships going on with India, China, and the whole, Taiwan issue?
I think from what Brander said was they can't go the north route. And then the winds picked up or something, obviously it was optimized as best as it could.
They can't go over China and so if they can't go over India, you got Everest and stuff there. Yeah, that makes sense.
Oh, he actually did say because of the mountain. That's actually one of the things. Yeah. Like I said, I'm not an expert on that, but it was a long flight.
I don't envy you an economy on that kind of a flight.
I know. I do a lot of CAS tickets too, because then I book last minute.
So, any other interesting highlights on your million mile? I mean, clearly you did all of SkyTeam carriers, whether they counted or not. So that's got to be a handful of Chinese carriers. That's Kenyan. I'm trying to think. There's got to be a couple other kind of airlines that you wouldn't normally think of. Perhaps Aerolíneas Argentinas.
Yeah. So that was one of the big ones that caused a little bit of a hiccup. Getting to Argentina, but the good thing about that one was I was leaving from Spain, flew up to France. The pricing on this flight, it's round trip from Paris to JFK to Buenos Aires, round trip, $750. And I was able to use a global upgrade because I'm Diamond on Delta in business class. It was a huge bargain. But getting down there to add on that very last carrier, that was time consuming, a little expensive, but I was like, do I really want to do that 19th one? I was like, nobody else is. Somebody's got to do it. So. But
the lengths that you went.
Yeah. With that, it was more of I wish I would have stayed in Argentina longer. I'd been there 20, 25 years ago. The architecture because a lot of these places, I didn't stay. Like the European leg and some of within Asia, I had stayed in Vietnam for a while. I stayed in Hainan, but that wasn't even one of the SkyTeam legs. But going out and just seeing other places, I wish I would have stayed in Argentina a little bit more. And then just one or two places, I got to go back. But, there's some time restraints, and it was getting in to be the holidays, closer to that. I guess one of the other highlights of that particular trip was I was able to go to the Delta One Lounge in Boston for their opening. And I've actually been to I was the first customer in JFK for the opening of the Delta One Lounges. And Tom and I were talking about that. Tom has a lifetime Sky Club membership that he bought. What are the details, Tom?
Oh, well, I was, originally a Northwest, elite member. So back in 2005, I think, is when I bought this, or 2006. I have to actually go back and remember when this was that I purchased this. But I bought a lifetime World Club membership from Northwest Airlines. And that has since converted into a Delta Sky Club lifetime membership, which is one of my most treasured items because, they have graciously, Delta has continued to allow me to use it. And not only that, I can use it while I'm flying other carriers and invite two guests. So basically, it's like an executive membership to the Sky Club that I can use when I'm not even flying Delta, which is limited, I think, just to its lifetime memberships.
That's better than investing in Delta or in Tesla.
Yeah, or Northwest Airlines stock at the time. They did go bankrupt eventually, so
The Delta One Lounge opening, those lounges are very nice. Not just the lounge itself, the food, who knows if that's going to stay at that high level, but JFK is huge. LA's nice, a good bit smaller. And then Boston is actually more of just a restaurant style, but seafood focused. The appetizer on the menu now is like this huge 4 oysters, huge shrimps.
Wow. It's like your own little
appetizer.
Wow. Huge. It's your own little raw bar or something.
Yeah. I've liked all of the Delta One lounges. I've been to several flagships. I've never been Polaris, but I've been Concord Room, Pier, all the other big ones. The D1 lounges are pretty nice.
I'm excited to go. I have unfortunately yet to make my way to them. Hopefully Trevor and I can make it there sometime this year. They definitely appear to be in the upper echelon of airline lounges in the North America at this point.
We've probably crafted 2 or 3 itineraries to try to do that, and we've had to cancel them.
That's true.
That's for our trips. I think we cancel probably 2 to 3 times the amount of itineraries that we actually fly.
I've never been, denied boarding on as many flights with this man, and I've never canceled so many tickets as with this man. He is an IROP and cancellation machine. I think the airlines will look at him and be like, okay, oh, wow, we had a real bump in cancellation fees lately. I was like, who's Trevor Mountcastle? Why are we getting so much revenue from him?
In all fairness, I've been denied boarding. I don't think you and I together have been denied boarding. I mean, we've always flown. It just
we've just had to reopen flights. We've never had to. Yeah, we've had to have them reopen a lot of flights. But by the way, this is not behavior that I've experienced with any other travel companion. It is unique to you. So you monopolize this particular aspect of flying. Anyway, big tangent over.
Your other travel companions are boring. Your other travel companions are boring. It's a simple answer.
He's throwing major shade at my friends. Thank you, Trevor. Thank you very much. I love that you enjoyed those Delta One lounges and even helped open some up from a ribbon cutting perspective. I think that's amazing. I'm curious, after doing all of this, are there any particular legs that you were on? Are there any of the SkyTeam carriers that you're excited to get back on now that you've tried all of them in the Alliance?
Well, actually, ITA. So I said ITA until I heard an Italian flight attendant say ITA Airlines is leaving SkyTeam. Actually, I think it just happened officially.
Like literally, I think this like a couple days ago or something.
Yeah. But I flew on there and I could get their A321 XLR, something. The longer range single aisle plane. Mm-hmm. They have, at least what the flight attendant said, it's their same business class seat as on their wide bodies.
Mm-hmm.
That seat was very nice. So was. But this was like Cairo to Rome. So it was only like a 4.5 hour flight. That was nice. One thing I did learn that's, take away from your listeners was, and I knew this, but I just hadn't really applied it or done enough travel, because a lot of these were smaller, a lot of these flights, I think the average I did was like 1,500 miles per flight was the average.
So but a lot of shorter flights.
Yeah, because I wanted to, when you're doing 50, like
you got to maximize.
The one thing I'm most proud of is actually my Asian flights. Like I knocked out Asia in a heartbeat. There was the one day because I didn't have the Chinese visa, I flew 4 segments in under 24 hours and went to a free transit hotel offside of the airport.
Dedication, man. Dedication.
Yeah, that was quick. Running it or figuring out how to upgrade either through a couple of different options, checking just to buy it outright, like the KLM Fifth Freedom that I flew from, oh my gosh, I'm probably going to get this wrong, like Jakarta to, no, not Bali, Jakarta to Kuala Lumpur. No, that wouldn't be right either.
To Singapore, maybe?
You
flew this, didn't you? Didn't you fly this Fifth Freedom, Trevor? The KLM Fifth Freedom?
Yeah. There's 2 of them. So
okay.
Kuala Lumpur. Oh, it would be Kuala Lumpur. Oh, Malaysia to Indonesia. Yeah, that's what it is. Kuala Lumpur to Jakarta on KLM. The price of premium economy, so like because it's a wide body, was only like $20 more than coach. Okay, that's a no-brainer. Then I bid for an upgrade like $40 on another one on a 3-hour flight. Then was able to upgrade at the gate for Vietnam for like $30. So all of these different options for U.S. airlines, you don't bid. You're probably not going to, you don't buy it at the gate. Gate agent would have no idea how to do that. All these other options on these, 9 big 3 airlines, Lufthansa even has stuff, with British Airways. You can, upgrade with Avios. If you buy coach, then it's only the price difference. It gets a little bit easier, but looking at that, that's a takeaway of something I would look into. Like even recently, I flew Malaysia Airlines separately from this, and I was able to upgrade. They were flying a wide body on a 2-hour flight, which is just crazy. But I was able to upgrade for like $35. And then I inquired about how much an upgrade would be from Kuala Lumpur to London. That's significant. And they're like, oh, it's $200, just flat fee.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no-brainer.
What?
No-brainer.
So it's just asking those questions or knowing to ask and who to ask. Get an email. Check this email from seatbidding.com or whatever it is. Just pay attention to that or ask around because, there could be significant savings like Seoul to Hong Kong. That's not short, but you could upgrade on that.
That reminds me of a story, a Chris story, right? Because, if you recall, like the first time I saw you a couple of months ago after a long time was, of all places, a Spirit Airlines flight. If you recall.
Oh, yeah. Oh, the big front seat. Yeah, because you were sitting
I think we had all upgraded. You had all bid for upgrades. I was like, who bid over me, for this big front seat? Because, I did the minimum bid. I was like, you've been outbid. And I'm like, what? Who outbid me? And of course, it was probably either you or some other, because, of course, there's 4 of us, miles and points people. And we dominated the big front seat cabin on this. I think we were going to San Antonio for a meetup.
Yeah, San Antonio. Yeah, there were 8 seats, and I think we knew like 5 people in it.
Yeah, pretty much. Like I just think that was just really funny. Just speaking of, again, opportunities to bid and to upgrade. It's not only just forward airlines. I think you may even see that opportunity on some of our, ultra low cost carriers like Spirit in this case. But you're absolutely right. And I have made use of those in the past, like years ago. And I don't know if they still do this, like KLM, for instance. You would go to the Crown Room in Amsterdam. And if you happen to be in coach, they would often have reasonable cash upgrades. I think and it was still, it was not insignificant. I think I paid one time, I spent like maybe $500 or something like that to upgrade business class from coach on KLM. This has got to be 15 years ago, guys. So, please take this data point with a grain of salt. But it was at the end of a really long trip. And I was just like, I am done. I am not getting in this coach seat. What is going to cost me to upgrade? And the agent gave me a reasonable price and I paid it. And I was very happy. I did leave the plane with one of those little Delft blue houses, which are another amazing SkyTeam KLM souvenir. I'm sure that everybody in this community knows about.
Fun little fact. They give those to you on the Fifth Freedom from Singapore to Denpasar.
There you go.
I flew one of the shortest flights for in business class to get those Delft houses.
Yeah, and speaking of those short flights like that, back during COVID, but even now, I've looked at prices like Emirates F on those Fifth Freedoms. I can't remember,
like the Bangkok, Hong Kong.
Hong Kong, but yeah, I was thinking Hong Kong. Yeah, you can get first class. It's like $600 if you want to just pay for it. It's only a handful of hours,
But you
but
get your shower. You get the
yeah,
shower, right?
yeah. So you get that experience, and then in my head, I'm going like, okay, I'm just testing it out to make sure I want to do it for 16 hours or 200,000 miles or something like that. Is it really worth it? The other thing is, and I kind of regret this because Joburg is actually a good place to pick up low premium economy seats for SkyTeam. And I think the going price right now, I've done it a couple of times, Joburg to any of the three SkyTeam hubs in Europe, Heathrow, Paris, or Amsterdam. So Joburg up to Europe over to either JFK, that's 1,300, or you can go all the way to LA for 1,700. You make a ton of miles because it's a partner flight and it's based on distance. So you don't buy a Delta ticket, you buy it through the partners. But remember Air France. They don't do it now, but they had the buy up from premium economy. And I'd already upgraded using a global certificate from Delta. And the upgrade cost into La Premiere was only $900 out of Joburg.
What a bargain that would be.
I didn't do it because I'd already confirmed business. And I asked how much the coach, I can't remember how much coach was at that point. Doing those paid upgrades, you can even get La Premiere. They do it. So it's different depending on the route and everything. So
and that was Joburg all the way to the US, or was
it was just
to CDG?
It was just to Paris, yeah.
That makes a little bit more sense. But even then,
well, I guess the question is do you get the Paris experience as part of La Premiere, or are you stuck?
Arriving on La Premiere, you'd think they'd let you transit in the F Lounge, but probably have to look.
You would think.
I want to say yeah. And then in my head, I was going like, okay, do it on the return. That way you get the lounge. So maybe not. I can't remember. But another thing I realized on this trip was, because I was in the Middle East for a little bit, Cairo, Beirut, down in that area, using Virgin miles, they seem to price out distance from point A to point C as the currency, or sort of the award chart. So you can go a very short distance point to point, but if you connect in Paris on a larger plane to where it's like 5 hours Cairo, Paris, or maybe even 6, then Cairo to Rome or something like that. Or actually, I think it was like Dubai, Paris, Cairo, or something crazy like that. It was only like 9,000 miles in coach and like 18,000 in business on 2 long haul or wide bodies.
Wow,
18,000 for 12 hours of flying.
Very miles efficient. It sounds.
Yeah, and that was using Virgin on that, and I just accidentally stumbled on that. I was like, wow, that's a good deal right there. So, but there's different. That's what my big takeaway, I think, was how to do that. Those other ways to upgrade your travel on those. So,
I mean, so it sounds like you've become a SkyTeam expert, which is absolutely awesome.
I was a million miler when I was 29 years old.
Okay, so you've been a SkyTeam expert, but perhaps you've refined those skills a little bit more with the partners.
Oh, yeah. I'll be able to do that a little bit more with a million miles. So my 15th. So of all the 19 flights that I took, I don't expect like ETA to credit and one other, but then even some of the other ones, I just recently my Korean credited. And that hit my 15 just this morning. So I still
congratulations.
I don't have the million yet, but it officially did credit. So we'll see. So hopefully a lot more SkyTeam comes.
I can't wait to hear more about it. And we'd love to have you back on, especially for a Patreon episode if you're open to it. Before we close out this topic, I have to ask for our listeners. So this promotion, was it miles or revenue, or did it have to be revenue? And then the second question is roughly how much did you spend either on a per segment or writ large? Share what you feel comfortable with. But I just want to give our listeners a perspective because, I mean, you did a significant amount of flying. I mean, 19 carriers, that's 19 segments minimum, not to mention repositioning and all that other stuff. I think it would just be helpful for our listeners to just have a little bit of perspective of kind of what that takes.
Well, going back to could you use miles? Yes, you could, but it had to be SAS miles, so Euro bonus miles. And a friend of mine, Marty, actually was the one who pointed this out, but you had to be active or already have some miles in your account or something like that. You could buy miles from SAS and then use them, but hardly anybody ever had any of those. So it was cash miles mostly. In terms of what I actually used, I kind of gave up on that and actually haven't sat down to calculate it yet. I kept track of the fare basis because that's the important thing to make sure you qualify to actually get points on it. But the way I looked at it is this: 1 million miles divided by 50,000 for a one-way business class to Europe. That's 20 business class flights to Europe. And then if I divide that by the cost of a ticket, let's say it's going to cost me 3,000 total to do it versus 4,000. The difference for each of those redemptions is only $10, $15, $20. But it made a huge difference to take the most convenient routing that was the fastest, best connection to where I could still sleep and work. So I actually didn't really worry about price. If I had to guess, and I'm going to figure it out once I get settled and do everything, but I was probably paying about $150 per second. So,
well, I really like that. I do, because not everything has to be penny pinching, right? I mean, you did 19 airlines. This was something that you wanted to do. This is something that you took vacation time to do. This is something that you got enjoyment out of. And so you don't have to penny pinch. I think that's something that we in the community sometimes miss out on. You know, sometimes you just want to be able to experience. When we travel, we've got a $30 rule. Used to be a $20 rule. Well, inflation. You know,
well, I've heard about this. Hey, you told me about this. Yeah, it makes your life go a lot easier. Yeah, go ahead.
Exactly. You're walking down. You're hungry. Hey, I'm going to duck in for a soda. I'm going to duck in for a baguette. I'm going to, we'll stop for a glass of wine. You know, you're taking it to a level that's appropriate for you. You wanted to do this. You wanted those flights to be efficient. And the reality is even having the efficient flights didn't break your bank, especially when you put into perspective the reward at the end of the rainbow.
Yeah, it was more of an investment of like, am I going to invest $20 or even 10 or 15 even maybe in the future to make my life much better now? Am I willing to pay $20 later and have a much more efficient? Because I'm not going to say it was easy. There were times I was so tired.
I can only imagine.
And it was really a mental thing. So I didn't actually buy any of my tickets in advance. If I bought it more than 24 hours in advance, that was rare. I use Priceline's refundability often to where I think I'm going to take this flight. It's within 24 hours, so just book it. And then I take another one. I bought 2 tickets at the airport, but I was aware of what the prices were for the routing. And a lot of it I used, especially for the Asia stuff, skip lagging. So like, for example, from Guangzhou to Xiamen to Seoul, for whatever reason, to Seoul, it's only if you flew to Seoul, it was always cheap from everywhere, within China, within other parts of Asia. Seoul was always cheap. So then I would I think I had 4 flights back to back going to Korea, but I only took the first segment because I skip landed. Because flying from, say, Xiamen to Shanghai is very expensive. Flights within China are actually very expensive. Hub to hub is very expensive for that. But if you tack on that Korean segment and then just throw it away, you get it cheaper. So a $300 flight is now $100. But I would use the 24-hour Priceline rule because a lot of times, there was this, plenty of people were scared that, hey, you miss a connection. It's a 4-hour connection, but there's only 3 flights a day. Well, you're not going to make it. And then if you've already purchased non-refundable tickets, then you're kind of messed up with that. So I always thought, I was like, look, I'm going to pay a little bit more and I'm going to have peace of mind that I can just cancel it, not lose all my money. But really, one of the most difficult parts was I kept looking at Google Flights all the time. Could I find it cheaper? Could I find it cheaper? And then I just quit. I was like, no, don't do it. It's spending too much mental energy
Right. Don't let
looking at
the
Google Flights to find, everybody wants to be that,
perfect. Yeah.
the perfect
Don't let the
itinerary.
perfect be the enemy of the good, right? Is the usual saying that I think I've been in the back of my mind as you've been talking for the last couple of minutes. So
Yeah,
Absolutely.
like,
Yeah. Good enough.
whoever,
Good enough.
the guy on Flyer Talk, and I stopped reading that Flyer Talk thread. I just quit after like the 20th page. I don't think I read Flyer Talk
because it'll drive you nuts, huh?
after I got to segment 2. I just quit. I was like, nope, not going to do it.
You knew your strategy already.
And I was comfortable.
That was only going to make you second guess yourself. Yeah. No, so that's
There's the guy I'm making up. I don't know who this person is. I don't even know. I'm sure somebody has said, "Oh, I did it for $1,876."
I mean, good for them.
Good. Yeah, I'm like, cool. I did it for
Cool,
3,500, but you know what? I was able to work. I was able to sleep. I was able to do everything. I had fun at the different lounges, everything. And then, some of the other people I met on the way, man, they were just nonstop, go, 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 go. And I'm like,
Wow.
no.
People doing it in like a week or something, right?
Yeah. Oh, I mentioned this. The guy I met, I think I was in week 3. I don't think I mentioned this. One of the people, he was on his 14th segment when I met him week 3 of the promo.
Talk about early adopter. So he was really on the game.
Yeah. So, and he's on Flyer Talk. I have his WhatsApp. I need to message him but he was done in 3 weeks.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
That was crazy.
So any final thought on this promotion, your experience with the promotion and sort of, would you do it again?
Oh, absolutely. I would have done it if I could have done it like what I learned of how to do it. I could have easily done it quickly and conveniently in about 2 weeks. So if I could have stacked it on, I would have done it over and over and over. It could have been so easy knowing what I know now.
I'd be tempted if something comes back around one of these days. I got lots of people to ask, to ask advice about, because, it is just amazing how many people are SAS points millionaires now, or will soon be. A lot more than I thought of, that I thought would, because, and it's funny, just finding the people that they're all on this one Kenyan Airways flight. And it's like, oh, it's a little meetup that kind of wasn't planned. Anyway.
And SAS, I thought, had something. I don't know if it was just a random social media post or if it was one of their higher ups just commenting, saying that they were actually surprised at how many people had set out on this challenge. So, I mean, I think it's great because it's an airline that we didn't as a Star Alliance airline. I saw them once in a blue moon as being a viable word.
If somebody in Copenhagen was like, Sven, that was a great marketing idea. We have to spend all this money on million points on everything. Let's not ask Sven next time for the next, marketing plan, I'm sorry. I'm being a little bit funny, but
I was laughing on mute. Yes, Sven either got the Employee of the Year award or the exact opposite of that.
Or exactly. Won't be hired anywhere ever again.
So I think we had one other topic that you wanted to talk about. And I know it's a topic that's close to your heart, and it's a topic that's close to a lot of our hearts. Tom had the chance to speak at the event this past year. I haven't made it myself just because it's always around my birthday. And I have a thing about traveling someplace that I haven't been or someplace far and wide for my birthday. But you sort of helped to reinvigorate the Chicago seminars some years ago.
Yeah, after COVID, a good friend of mine, Howie Rappaport, had been running Chicago seminars, and COVID kind of took that away from us. But afterwards, and it had been at the Holiday Inn in Elk Grove Village for 13 years. And after a hotel hasn't gone through a renovation, and everybody's a Hyatt fan or Hilton or Marriott. It's just, but the thing was about that event, and I was like, man, the first time I went was maybe the 6th year or something. I was in grad school, so didn't travel a lot. But when I finished grad school, got back into the game, and Howie's like, hey, you want to come by? It's like, yeah, sure. It's like, where is it? It's like the Holiday Inn. And I'm like, oh, maybe not. But I literally,
I'm not going to lie. That's a reason I didn't want to. That was definitely a blocker for me.
Yeah. But I 100% true. So I've actually managed a couple other events, conferences for work. for both professionally and personally with other events. So I know what to look for, but I literally walked into the Holiday Inn and was like, oh, do not move it. Do not move it. This is a great location, great hotel. It's just set up win-win situation. And, this is well before COVID. And because we had the whole hotel, everybody got to know each other, the community building, it was perfect, except it was at a Holiday Inn and the rooms were small, hadn't been. So anyway, COVID comes around and we finally host and ends, not ends, but we get to have another one. And it's a Holiday Inn. Everybody's such a Hyatt fan and the hotel was getting run around. We were able to work out a really good deal with the Hyatt Regency O'Hare, which is a huge hotel. 1,100 rooms. It is massive. We're able to move Chicago Seminars, the oldest and largest points and miles event in the world. Had over 500 people there, about 55 speakers over the event, something from beginners to advanced people. And obviously, you two have been around the game. A lot of it is knowing other people. So two ways I look at it is, even though this is a large event that, there's entry level to advanced, but when you meet people, but also get to know the advanced people off outside the event, that's really where it starts to shine. But I also look at it like, okay, people like us, we've been around the game for long enough. It's time for us to get back. So we're the older generation. We've done things. It's time for us to share. So even though it's a large event, you don't have to share the super secret sauce. But you can go help all these beginners to get and take advantage and learn the things about, that you did, that you're grateful for all three of us, we're looking at decades here. But yeah, seminars, completely volunteer event. Nobody gets paid. Speakers don't even get paid. The organizers definitely don't get paid. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears on it. We're trying to set up the dates and the location again. But yeah, chicagoseminars.org. It's a great place, an event to go through. Hope
having been there, this last one, it was a great success, Chris. It was amazing. Definitely one of the best ones ever. The location was amazing. Again, I think your experience, putting together meetings, I think definitely contributed. All the things you said, all the interaction, the social interaction, all the meetings and contacts and everything that was exchanged was great. And the venue was amazing. And I think the fact that, you could see that money had gone into the event, and that's where all the kind of the fees and everything, because you could just, the quality of the food and the, the venue and kind of how everything got put together. Really excellent, amazing place. And I cannot give a strong enough recommendation to listeners that when and if those, when those tickets go out for the next Chicago seminars, make it a point to block it on your calendar and buy those tickets, because it's a great opportunity.
And I think it really aligns with the ethos of the community. So most of my experience with the bigger conferences were FTUs. I know Chicago Seminars has always been separate from the FTUs. Even at the frequent traveler universities, back when they were big events, we took over hotels down in Tampa, in Tyson's and other places. Charity was always a big deal there, and as well as obviously the networking and everything else. And you guys keep that alive in the Chicago seminars as well. I mean, we have incredible experiences. I mean, I would wager a guess that everybody on this particular podcast episode has been to the Maldives. We've been to places that people probably would never have dreamed that they'd be able to go. We've flown in products that people probably don't even know exist in some parts of definitely in some parts of the world, but even some parts of the country. The fact that we can still carve out a little bit of our wallets to support important, charitable causes, I think is really important. And I love how you guys have kept that alive, even when, as kind of FTU, and this is not a shade toward FTU. Tom and I are really excited to participate with FTU in May. They've got an event coming up that we've been asked to support, and we're excited for that. And I think they're trying to go bigger. I don't know how big are they going to be able to go. We're anxious to hear about that. Others have had, gotten smaller and smaller. And as you get smaller, you lose a little bit of that charitable aspect. And I love that you guys have just kept that going. It's the camaraderie, it's the networking, It's helping those that are new to the community, but it's also the charity as well. And I think all those things come together to make a really, truly unique event.
Yeah, and just to plug that a little bit more, that's mainly from our raffle, but also our auction. So a lot of our speakers, we auction off our speakers, but we raised, don't quote me on this, I want to say it was close to 30,000 for 500 people. That's a significant amount that went to 2 different charities. And we are a 501c3. So again, purely volunteer effort, nonprofit, but the charity aspect of it, and just it's a community event. We're trying to structure it to where even like all of our presentations, we want to open it up to be, even if you're not a blogger, if you're an expert in something, throw in a proposal, we'll look at it, and then you're going to be speaking in front of 500 people. So we're trying to really push together. There were others very intentional social aspects where people could meet people. Like we grouped, hey, you're from the Northeast, go over here. You're from the West Coast, go over here. Meet those people. There's other smaller groups, meetups going on. So trying to make that happen. So a lot of things going on, but I appreciate you mentioned the charity aspect of it, because that is big, huge. And that, $30 grand is not chump change for an event just come together for 48 hours. So that's pretty significant.
And with the amount of volunteers that give their time
and your volunteers, especially at the, there's the organizer level. There's about 6 or 7 key people, but then there's 20 or 30 more below that at the event level that really don't, they've been there, they've done that. They're like, where else can I help out? Because we want newer people to always be at the event and learning. So, registration, other stuff coming up, prepping for the next event that's going on, or a social or something like that. It does take a lot of people at the actual event. So we're very appreciative of that.
A lot of unsung heroes at that seminars. So
yeah, unsung heroes, and it takes a village. Okay. Well, we've been going a whole lot longer than I think any of us expected to go.
I wasn't surprised. I figured this was going to be a long episode.
I figured it'd be long. I didn't think it would get close to our longest, which I think we're on the heels of. Any final thoughts, Chris, before we close out? No,
just enjoy travel while you can.
And Chris,
miles in devaluations, they come and go. Everybody, when I hear the youngsters talking about, devaluation is, I'm like, yeah, but
they have no idea.
You can earn a lot more. Like, I've been around since my first points flight was 1989.
Oh, you got me beat.
You got me beat as well.
Melbourne. It was American. Melbourne, Florida to Orlando to DFW to LA to Honolulu to Sydney to.
That's a good one. That's a pretty
round
trip.
That
sounds like a pretty amazing one. Well, we might need to hear about that next time.
Yeah, you beat me on my first, and I was many years later. That is incredible.
Back then it was always difficult to earn miles. You had to fly it.
You had to actually fly.
Yeah, but then, first, so I always use this one, like first class or coach to the Caribbean or Mexico was $20K round trip. First class was only 25. I mean, it was barely, but getting those 25 was difficult. And they're like, devaluations. I'm like, yeah, but you can just sign for a credit card and you get 3 flights.
Well, and that's a really great point. I mean, you think about it, 15, 20, let's call it 20 years ago, you had the gold coins, right? And we don't talk a ton at manufacturer spending on this show because it's, on the free side, the no annual fee side on the Milenomics feed. But you're talking about 1-to-1 on the gold, right? Cut forward to 5 or 7 years ahead, and you're talking about 5 points per dollar on inks at Staples and Office Depot. And, so you've got just an absolute, you've got a great point. And that's an easy example. I mean, there are even sign-up bonuses where,
back in that day, like 10K or 20K, I was like, 10,000 miles. Wow. For signing up for a credit card, what a great deal.
And then you've got when the American Airlines executive card first came out, it was 100,000 points after 7,000 spend, and then you could churn them based on cities' rules. That was
golden. I feel like it's almost like the golden age.
It felt it felt like it, but then you look at some of the things that they did in the last year with American Express. I mean,
the one thing that will never devalue the wonderful friendship and camaraderie of this community. That is the one thing that only increases in value, guys. So I'd focus on that because that's the one thing you don't have to worry about. Devaluations. I think these connections and friendships you make, they last a very long time and they're very durable and extraordinarily valuable.
So well said. Chris, can our listeners find you anywhere?
I'm not really on social media that much.
So they can find you at
on
Chicago
a
Seminars.
SkyTeam flight, I guess.
SkyTeam flighter at chicagoseminars.org.
Delta One Lounge. You'll be there next time you're there.
Well, that's the show. Thanks for joining us.
If you've enjoyed this episode, consider becoming a Milenomics Patreon member and get access to even more in-depth miles, points, and travel content.
Until then, we hope your next story is a travel story.